Zap. I'm from and with Aquatic Sensors. I work out of the Kenora, Ontario, Canada office. And we love HABs, so we're very excited with our partnership with BloomOptix. And this is our first webinar, so we're so happy to have you all here from wherever you guys are today, whether it's morning or afternoon. I know we've got everybody from North America. So before we go any further, I just want to get my partner Patrick to introduce himself.
Excellent. Thanks, Andrea. I'm Patrick Sanders. I'm based in the California, USA office for Aquatic Sensors. And as Andrea mentioned, we are very excited about today's webinar and getting things kickstarted. We were at the most recent National Water Quality Monitoring Conference. Some of you guys that are on the call here today met us there, but we had a lot of in-depth discussions at our trade show booth. And we envision, good likelihood of the same happening today. So looking forward to a great presentation and demonstration from Igor, and just having a good discussion afterwards. So Andrea, I'll pass it back to you so you can introduce Igor.
Great, thanks, Patrick. So the man of the hour, his name is Igor Mrdjen, and he is the program and science lead at BloomOptix, based in Syracuse, New York. Igor received his PhD and master's from The Ohio State University with a focus on environmental health sciences. Igor's research has been focused on finding new ways to monitor for harmful algal blooms, preventing exposures, and minimizing their impacts. He has a particular interest in underserved communities and bodies of water that do not fall under national monitoring programs. In 2019, Igor and his colleagues started BloomOptix, where they have been finding new ways to monitor and identify HABs using AI. So baton pass to you, Igor, take it away.
Cool, thank you guys. And thank you for having me. So I'm gonna share my screen here. All right, hopefully everybody can see that. If not, feel free to complain. All right, so yeah, just a couple of logistics things. The webinar today is just going to be just a really short 10 to 15 minute maybe PowerPoint that you see here, and then I'm going to do a quick demo on how the whole thing works, because it's one thing to see pictures and numbers and things, and then to see how it works in practice and how it it could be used by you. So yeah, today basically the focus is just to learn how you guys could potentially use the BloomOptix AI on your sites, and then also get some feedback from you, because this is a living, breathing platform that kind of learns on the fly, as we like to say. And something that we can make changes to organically. So if you guys have any points of interest or advice that aren't included right now into the platform, I'd love to hear about them so we can improve and expand. But yeah, let's just get started and let's get to it. So the inspiration for this product and this AI kind of came about from our work in the HAB space, and kind of recognizing the limitations and problems that we currently have in the way which we monitor for harmful algal blooms around the world, basically, right? And so that kind of came from the realization that typically when communities or organizations monitor for HABs, they fall into two categories, roughly. Those folks with a ton of money to invest into really expensive equipment, sensors and things like that, and really do a thorough job of covering their whole lake and do real-time monitoring with sensors. And those folks that really have to rely heavily on volunteers and community support and so forth, and little to no funding to kind of go with their monitoring programs. So currently what we typically see is this heavy reliance on not just that expensive equipment, but also on crude reports of harmful algal blooms. Basically, somebody will go onto a lake or a beach or near a water intake, and they'll say, hey, I see some green stuff in the water, and they report it to their public health department or lake manager or whoever the case may be. And then a person is sent out, they collect the sample, they take it to FedEx, they ship it overnight to a laboratory, and then it sits there on the shelf until a scientist gets to stick it under a microscope and run some tests on it. And then typically it's been 5 to 6 days, and $100 or so later, you might find out whether or not the action you took at the time you collected the sample was justified, whether that meant shutting down a beach or roping off access or whatever the case may be, advanced water treatment or whatnot. And so what we realized was this kind of is a very inefficient system of doing things, because by the time you find out what was in your water, you should already have acted in order to protect public health and kind of be protective of the stakeholders on your lake or river or body of water. And so we thought, why don't we kind of try to optimize this and take out the need to ship samples, take out the need to have a trained scientist process that sample and look at it under a microscope, and kind of enact the use of digital microscopy and artificial intelligence to compress that analysis time down to about 30 seconds instead of the 5 or so days that it can sometimes take to get data. And so step one of that was basically kind of developing a plan to develop this AI and kind of working on the methodology. And step 1A was to figure out what kind of digital microscope we can use to actually take photos of these harmful algal bloom causing cyanobacteria under a microscope in the field without having to ship stuff to a laboratory or take it back to a designated lab area. And so we talked with a bunch of people and consulted experts in the field and used our experience as well to kind of review the market and the possibilities out there. And we basically settled on only one option for us, and that is the use of our partner ioLight's microscopes. So ioLight are a fellow startup out of the UK. They're based around London, and they make these little microscopes that you can see there on the screen. I'll be sharing more about them, and you'll get to see more of them during the demo. But basically, there are these small, pocket-sized, almost digital microscopes that link wirelessly to your phone. They have about a 1 micron resolution and roughly about 150 times magnification, meaning that they have just enough resolution and magnification to see cyanobacterial colonies, but not too much where they become finicky and difficult to work with. And so because of that, they're really accessible and approachable for use by experts and amateurs. And they're highly portable and robust because you can stick it in the pocket of your cargo pants or into a backpack. And you can take them to the field with you, and they hold up to abuse relatively well. And like I said, because they're linked to your cell phone, they also enable you to use other features like, hey, I'm going to take a picture on my cell phone, and thereby that photo is saved into my albums and backed up automatically into my online storage. It also allows you to share stuff through your cell phone via text messages, emails, and links, and so forth. Basically, anything your phone can do with a regular picture, it can now do with a microscopic picture. So once we had our microscopes picked out, we basically distributed a whole bunch of them to volunteers around Wisconsin and New York. And we said, hey guys, can you please collect some photos for us and send us some samples to our partner laboratory at SUNY ESF here in Syracuse. And we developed a framework where we took those photos and we trained the AI to see what a taxonomist sees when they're evaluating cyanobacterial harmful algal blooms under a regular microscope. And so that framework basically now involves taking a photo with the ioLight, or a couple of photos with the ioLight, uploading it with some additional information, letting the BloomOptix AI do its thing, and then waiting about 30 seconds to receive your report on the back end that you can then share with others and so forth. And so once we had this framework laid out, we wanted to test it in the real world, because it's one thing to have an AI that works in a laboratory in perfect conditions, and it's a whole other thing to have an AI that works in the hands of a typical user, especially in terms of citizen scientists, field hands, and so forth. So we distributed about 20 different microscopes and access to the BloomOptix AI to 20 different users around the United States, covering the 5 states that you see listed there on the right. During the course of this pilot, we ended up sampling over 170 unique instances of harmful algal blooms. And throughout this process, we ended up collecting over 5,000 different photos of cyanobacteria under the microscope to run our study on. Of those 5,000 photos, we took about 4,500 of them and did further improvements and optimization to the AI, because what we found was the original AI that we developed was just a little bit too inaccurate for our tastes and for the new environments it was being deployed in. And so by incorporating an additional training set of those 4,500 images, we greatly improved its functionality. And then the remaining 500 photos that we did were manually processed by taxonomists, just like the other 4,500. And then were also processed by the AI itself. And we compared the labels assigned to, at each one of those photos by the taxonomists and the AI to see where the two disagreed or differed in the labels and IDs assigned. And so over the course of, over the collection of those 500 photos, we found that there was over 4,000 different comparison points that were labeled and reviewed by both the AI and human. Now, these comparison points can be anything that was mistaken for cyanobacteria or anything that really was a cyanobacteria in those images. And one of the most surprising things that we found was that, well, you know, logically, it might not be that surprising once I explain it, but we did see that in about 12% of cases, the AI actually outperformed the human taxonomist in the labels it assigned and how thorough it was in reviewing images. And so the reason that this happened, what we found out was, over the course of an entire summer of processing 5,000 images by hand, and you can imagine how many colonies we had to label if only 500 of them had 4,000 colonies in our subset. Humans tend to make mistakes because humans are not meant for repetitive tasks that take a very long time and tend to be very boring. And so over the course of the summer, the human taxonomists made a lot of mistakes in just pressing the wrong button to assign the wrong label, or skipping an image accidentally, or hitting the next button one too many times and things like that. So photos got skipped and things were overlooked and so forth. Whereas the AI was really kind of much more thorough, much more reliable, and much more consistent in the way and the methodology it reviewed these images. So it didn't actually skip or overlook any colonies or anything like that. And another thing that we found was in that about 4% of cases, the photos that were uploaded or individual colonies in some of the photos that were uploaded were just too blurry for the AI or the human to accurately identify those colonies. In some instances, it was the AI basically assigning a very low confidence classification. And then in other cases, it was cases of the human saying, well, you know, everything else on this slide is microcystis, and I see this really, really blurry thing that's out of focus. So I'm going to assume that's also microcystis based on my experience, which is not something that, you know, taxonomists should be doing, because that kind of biases your results and you know, relies on assumption a little too much, right? But ultimately, what we found was that the actual rate of inaccuracy of the AI compared to taxonomist was just under 6%. And that 6% is made up of three different numbers. There is a less than 1% rate of false negatives, meaning the AI labels just about everything it sees. It only missed 0.9% of the colonies, the cyanobacteria in that 500 image subset. And of that 0.9%, most of it was from dying colonies and colonies it had never kind of seen before, right? So it tended not to label that kind of stuff. We also had a false positive rate of 3.4%. And these false positives were basically instances where the AI saw maybe some vegetative debris or some other algae that thought, oh, this looks close enough to cyanobacteria, I am going to label it as microcystis or as Dolichospermum and so forth. And one of the reasons that this is so high is because during the study, we actually spiked the sample set with a bunch of images from that we collected in the laboratory ourselves that we thought these are, if anything is going to throw this thing off into producing false positives, it's going to be these images here. So we included about 100 plus or so images that we thought would be really tricky for the AI to analyze. So a false positive rate of 3.4% might even be a little bit elevated. But in reality, the human taxonomist assigned classification and AI classification only differed in about 1.6% of cases. And so overall, the AI performed as well as or better than a taxonomist in about 94% of cases, once we account for those blurry images where human and AI were both kind of wrong in those cases due to both poor photo quality. And the good news is that all of these errors can actually be greatly improved upon by, number one, expanding the image library of the AI to learn from, and number two, just taking better photos. And one of the things I didn't mention is that during our pilot study, what we wanted to test was how comfortable people were with could get with the platform with minimal intervention. So we only provided 40 minutes of a video conference to train people how to use the microscopes and the AI, because we wanted to see how bad it could get if somebody just picked up one of these things off the shelf and started using it with no training. And so, yeah, we were really encouraged to see that actually those blurry images decreased in frequency exponentially after the third or fourth time somebody was using the platform. So we're really confident that even that 3.9% can be decreased almost down to zero with better training. Okay, some other notable findings during the study. We received a lot of photos from 3 particular lakes or 3 particular groups. But what we found was that over the course of the study, especially in those 3 locations where we got the most photos from, we saw that there was great colony dynamic shifts in the cyanobacteria that dominated those lakes. And the colony structure would very frequently change throughout the summer. So starting, for example, with Dolichospermum early in the season, and then Wernickeia late in the season in certain lakes. We also saw large changes in colony structure from in-field photos versus the photos that were taken in a laboratory, and I'll expand upon that in a little bit. But basically, the process of shipping a sample to a laboratory greatly changed the morphology and the way that the colonies were kind of distributed in those samples. And then we also saw the fact that, you know, over the course of using these microscopes and using this system, the users that participated in our pilot, their ability to take really high quality photos and improve their submission quality sharply rose after about the 2nd or 3rd use of the microscope, right? And so, yeah, a couple of just short little kind of case studies that we also saw. We saw a couple of times where folks would say, oh, you know, I was out and I was looking at my lake and I was 1000% convinced it was a cyanobacterial algal bloom and we were about to shut this lake down. And then I took out the microscope and checked it out checked out a water sample under the microscope, and I saw a bunch of stuff swimming around. So for example, in this case, from one of our friends down in Oklahoma, Bill uploaded this photo on the left, and he said, you know, I was 100% convinced this was a cyanobacterial bloom, and it turned out to be Euglena, and I was able to kind of take a different type of action than I would have with a harmful algal bloom, had it been microcystis or something like that. So we thought that was a great demonstration of kind of what this could be. And then we also saw other instances, like I said, where, you know, somebody would go out there and they would say, you know, I thought I had a harmful algal bloom, and, you know, I looked under a microscope, and sure enough, it was either a Phamazamenon or a Dolichospermum, as you can see there at the bottom. And so we would basically say, oh, this is great. This is going to be a really good sample for us to take more images of, analyze more in the lab. Can you please send it over? And so they would package that sample, send it overnight on ice per protocol that most labs normally use. And by the time it made it to our laboratory, those delicate colonies would either be busted up or they would be so degraded that they may as well be, you know, they're practically dead for all intents and purposes. So by the time we analyzed them in laboratory, you know, they would look completely different than what you would expect or what you would see them looking like on site and at the point of collection. So it was really kind of an unexpected finding for us throughout that study. But basically, in conclusion, we did accomplish our goals of you know, reducing that turnaround time to that 30-second analysis after image upload. And we did see that the platform is really easy to scale for not just citizen scientists, but also lake management, and even in the laboratory itself. Again, we saw that roughly 94% agreement between AI and taxonomists, with relatively low false positives and negatives. And also that, this kind of tool is really helpful in rapid risk assessment, and especially in community engagement, because we were able to mobilize entire communities to work with us on this pilot study. So the thing that we're working on right now is to see how well the cell counts and the data that the system provides correlates with FluoroProbe, because that's what a lot of people use right now in laboratories reports to kind of analyze their lakes for cyanobacterial blooms. Yeah, what's next? So the next thing for us is basically the system is ready to use, and it is available now for purchase at BloomOptix.com. But we're also working on enabling it with some added functionalities. So right now we have, as I said, those first two rectangles on the left there. We've got the front-end user experience and an AI that powers it, but we're also working on building a data archiving and dissemination platform as well, so that every time you upload data through the app, it gets data based on the back end, so you can download it for your own research, and so that we can use it for smart analytics, machine learning programs, and so forth, to basically empower you with some advanced statistics on the fly, and potentially even predictions, such as saying, hey, every time your weather patterns are this, followed by an event X, we see an uptick in testing for harmful algal blooms. So every time we detect that pattern coming up, we're going to give you a warning to say, hey, be on more lookout and expect more testing to occur in the next couple of days, right? These are all things we can do relatively easily going forward, and it's something that we're looking to implement in the future. And so as it stands, we're, again, still developing those features, but I'd just like to take a second and just thank the folks that provided us funding for this project, and all of our partner and organizations and pilot participants, as well as all the folks out of SUNY ESF, like Dr. Greg Boyer, Dr. Stephen Shaw, and then our graduate students, Abby and Dinara, and our undergrads, Sarah and Sarita. So with that, I'm going to take a second to shift my camera over so that I can do the demo of how this entire process works. And then Andrea, I believe you had a poll you were going to run while I fidget around with all of my stuff.
Totally. Thanks, Igor. Yeah, thanks for that. So we will take some questions, and if you want to even write some in the chat for later, so you don't forget, or you want us to ask Igor them later, please put your questions in the chat. Let me just run a poll here, because we're very interested in a few things. If you don't mind answering them, here's the first poll. Okay, and I will get us the results if everybody is done.
Great.
I'm just going to share the results really quick so everybody can have a peek. It looks like Microcystis for the win, with Aphanizomenon coming in a hard second. Good.
That's great.
Okay, Igor, are you ready for the demo?
I think I am. Okay. So yeah, so one of the reasons we're asking about what kind of genera you see in your lakes is because currently the BloomOptix system is trained to recognize 6 different genera of cyanobacteria. And so Microcystis, Dolichospermum, Aphanizomenon, Ornithinia, Limnarephis, and Gliotrichia are those 6. And those are the 6 most common ones that we found to occur in our sample set. We are also aware of stuff like of stuff like Planktothrix and Cylindrospermopsis and so forth. And the process to adding those to the functionalities is quite similar to what we have already employed. So if you have those on your lakes, reach out to us, and we'll try to work with you to get those set up. But yeah, let's get to the demo. So I'm going to put my gloves on because I collected a HAB sample yesterday, and I think if it's typical to the lake that I sampled, it might be very toxic. So I am going to be safety first, right? So these are the ioLight microscopes that we use to analyze our samples. Like I said, they fit into a backpack, into a cargo pants pocket, and so forth. You also may see or want one of these ones with what they call the XY stage attached. The XY stage is basically a holder for your microscope slide that is magnetically attached to the stage, so that if you're on a boat or anything like that, this holds firm so that it doesn't get away from you while you're working. For the sake of this demo, I like to use this one just because it keeps things steady and keeps wind from driving stuff off. But for the sake of this demo, I'm just going to use the traditional 2mm ioLight microscope. So here's my sample that I have collected. I'm just going to homogenize it a little bit. And for the sake of this demo, I've already connected my iPad here that is anchored onto my laptop because my stand broke. I've already connected it to the Wi-Fi that the microscope generates. So I'm just going to open up the ioLight app and connect to the device. And you're going to see my screen stay black for a little while. Okay. Now I'm going to deploy the swing arm up, and you can now see the condenser. And as my hand passes underneath, now you can see that the iPad is becoming the view piece, and the camera here that is in the mast is basically transmitting this picture onto the iPad. Okay, so I am going to take my microscope slide and stick it here, and then I'm going to take a sample from my Microcystis heavy bloom that I collected yesterday, and just put 2 drops right onto that slide. Okay. All right, and now I am going to cover it with a cover slip, and hopefully, I think there's some good chunks there that I can zoom in on. And so now I'm going to try to do this without blocking your view. I'm going to press down on the mast until things start popping up on the screen there. And pardon me for being clumsy about this. It's hard to do when you're doing it offhand. And there's a nice Microcystis colony right there. So the one thing to know about this sample is this sample is collected in Lake Neotawanta, New York, and that lake is very famous for having really bad algal blooms, but also for having a really weird species of Microcystis in it that is really dense, forms these really dense dark colonies. So the things that you're seeing here on the screen are going to look a little bit different than a typical Microcystis colony will look like, but still, they make very, very similar formations, and the morphology is very, very similar. So I'm going to go ahead and move around a little bit, see what else I can find. And you can notice that, some things may be a little bit out of focus on the level that I focused it on. And to get back into focus, you can easily just use that arm again, like right there, or there is the fine focus knob here on the corner that you can use to basically do fine focus adjustment and really zero in on the clarity for your stuff. And I realize that it doesn't look fantastic right now because you're looking at a screen of a screen, right? But when you have and you're satisfied with your focus on a certain image, you can press the photo button, and the photos are taken and saved into a special folder on your device. And so what we recommend is taking 5 photos per slide and processing 2 slides for a total of 10 photos that you will upload to the BloomOptix app. Right, and so I'm just going to keep moving around. I see some Dolichospermum right there, very traditional and typical twisty colony formation there. So I'm going to take another photo and so forth. And for the sake of this demo, and I've also collected a bunch of photos this morning that I'm going to show you how to upload to the AI. So yeah, I'm not going to do too many more this way. So while I switch over to my cell phone so I can just broadcast my screen, if you guys have any questions, please go ahead and ask them. But basically, that is the entire process of taking photos with the ioLight that you can then share or upload to BloomOptix. So there's that.
One question that came in, Igor, is the sample from a plankton tow that would concentrate the algae, or is it a simple grab?
It is just a grab sample. So like I said, this lake that we sample from is very densely blooming. In fact, that first image I shared on the presentation of that really heavy bloom was yesterday when I collected the sample. So it is not a tow. So I am going to go ahead and share my screen, and hopefully everybody can see this. All right, I'm going to open up the BloomOptix app. And so like I said, I already collected photos of this sample earlier this morning, and you're going to see those very distinct cyanobacterial colonies here shortly. So let me just minimize everybody's faces here for a second and move it off the screen. So once you have your images, you're going to open up the BloomOptix app, and the first thing you are going to do is hit that plus sign to add new photos or a new sample to your sample set. From here, you open up the ioLight folder, and you are going to basically select the photos that you want to upload. Like I said, I collected some photos this morning, so those are the top 8 or so there. From there, you are also going to assign a location to your sample. So because this sample was taken in Lake Neotwanta in New York, I'm going to zoom in here on Fulton. Whoops. Here we go. And you can see how green that lake is even from just a satellite view, but basically place a pin on where I collected that sample and then back out of it. So this is my Lake Neotwanta test, right? So I'm just going to name it accordingly. Then I'm going to assign a bloom extent for it. So bloom extent is something that we came up with to basically help people communicate just how large a bloom formation on a lake is. A bloom extent of 1 is basically just little stripes of cyanobacteria that you sampled and are only found in like 10-meter formations or less, right? A bloom extent of 5 is basically, oh man, the whole lake is green, it's all pea soup, it's a mess, right? So based on our knowledge of Lake Neotwanta, I know that this is a bloom extent of 4 because a large majority of lake was covered by the bloom, and there are already warnings out on the lake to avoid contact with the water, right? Additionally, because I was at the lake, I also collected some field data. So now when I hit that additional observations or additional parameters button plus there, I can actually include other things like, hey, the area was closed. So I'm going to include a thing on that. I know that the sampling depth that I collected at was just under the surface of the water, so 0.1 meters. And I know that the ambient temperature was fairly high, and the UV index was about a 6, right? But if I have any other things that I'm collecting on site, like the conductivity of the water, the pH, if I'm getting toxin concentrations or anything like that, I can also add all of that. And everything I check off actually gets included into my sampling report. So like I said, my sampling depth was 0.01. So that was that. Ambient temperature in degrees C was about 35 yesterday, I believe. Sorry, 33. Really doesn't matter for the sake of this demo, but and then the UV index was about a 6 out of 11. And so the next thing I'm going to do is just review the photos that I uploaded. You can see those funky colonies. They're just a little bit different than most Microcystis cyanobacteria are, and we did capture some Dolichospermum in there as well. So I'm going to go ahead and submit that, and that little processing widget is going to spin until the photos are uploaded and things are ready to go. So this process typically takes 30 seconds. It is highly dependent on internet, though. Sometimes when you're out in the field and the internet is spotty, it gets a little bit slower, but sometimes when you're connected to Wi-Fi, like I am at the moment, it's a lot quicker, right? And once the process is done and everything is uploaded, it kicks you back out to this landing page. The landing page is basically your way of reviewing what samples have been submitted and what samples have been analyzed. The little clock widget on the right means that the sample is currently processing. A status of HAB means at least one cyanobacteria has been detected. And a status of ND means that no cyanobacteria have been detected. So once you've uploaded your sample, all you're going to do is drag down that list and refresh it until you get a diagnosis. See, it's already done there for the sample I just uploaded. So when I open up that sample by clicking on it, I get a display that shows me which types of cyanobacteria were detected. So here I have Microcystis and Dolichospermum, the total numbers of colonies detected in the images that I uploaded, and then an average density of cells per ml based on some literature values and some values that we developed ourselves. I can also see those core fields that I fill out, such as bloom extent, location description, and so forth. And then also the extra parameters that I included, and everything that gets included onto this report is also data based on the backend. So, you never have to lose the data. Then if I want to actually see how the AI labeled and what it judged each thing to be, I can actually review the photos, and you can see that each cyanobacterial colony gets a box drawn around it, and it gets an ID of, for example, Microcystis, and then a percentage. And that percentage is basically the AI telling you, this is how confident I am in the label that I have assigned to this colony. So if it assigns a label of 99.999% or whatever, that's a really high concentration, a really high confidence in the label that it provides. But if it assigns something like an 80%, then you can take that with a little bit bigger grain of salt, right? And so I'm just going to scroll through some of these photos, and I can see that most all of them are labeled correctly here. And yeah, once I'm done, I can then share these reports with the folks that I work with. And actually share them on the account. So yeah, one other thing I will show you, let's see if I can find the appropriate test. That's not the one.
Also, while you're at it, Igor, can you zoom in on those pictures like you can a regular picture, right? So you can get a better idea of.
Yes, you can. Here I can show you with, for example, these are some of our more diverse photos here. So when you open up one of these guys, you can say, oh, I'd like to zoom in. You can actually just zoom in and analyze things a little bit more closely as well. But the other things that you can do is basically go through your landing page, and you can use this little lookup button, and you can actually search and filter for certain results or certain conditions and filter out those entries in your landing page. And then you can even hit the share button, and what it will do is basically make a PDF report that it posts on a website, and then you will share a link to that website with some of the folks in your network. And so that way you can basically share reports on the fly without using too much data and things like that. That might be a consideration to some users. And so that's pretty much the functionality of the BloomOptix app and the AI. And so, yeah, I think from here on, Andrea, we can probably go into questions and things like that. I'm sure that there's a bunch of stuff.
Okay. Yep, there's a lot of stuff in the chat. Does anybody want to raise their hand and ask Igor? Because there's lots of questions in chat. Does anybody want to go ahead and put up their hand to ask him a question now? Because there were some lengthy questions. And then just raise your hand, and I can unmute you or unmute yourself. Just taking a quick peek here.
And to be clear, if we don't get to something while I'm moving my camera here, I will happily reach out to you guys and answer them in an email or whatever.
Okay, so I guess we'll start. I don't see anybody with a hand up, just lots of chat questions. So we'll go ahead and read those, maybe from, I don't know if we should start from the beginning. The first one that just came up from what you were showing us, Igor, was, is it possible for the AI to calculate total cyanobacteria density?
Yeah, so it depends. If the cyanobacteria you have in your body of water are only the 6 genera that we test for, then yes, you can just add up all the numbers for the cell counts to kind of get the total cyanobacterial density. We didn't do a total cyanobacterial density field on the app, but that is actually a really good idea that I'm not sure why we overlooked. So that might be something we implement in the very near future. Yeah.
I have a related question, because
Sure.
Your list showed like cells per ml, but as someone who does a lot of phytoplankton counting, that's very dependent. If you're just taking a grab out of like a concentrated bloom, that's pretty meaningless. And if you have a net, you've got to know your net opening and your toe length and all that. So I think that number I would take with a grain of salt.
Yeah, so the numbers that we provide for cell counts are very dependent on the literature values that were used to establish those cell counts. Those are mostly the literature values used for the Vermont study, if anybody is familiar, for establishing cell counts for cyanobacteria and things like that. When it comes to establishing cell counts, this is kind of why we're developing a filtration method to go hand in hand with this, where a certain volume of water is run through a mesh screen and then pipetted onto a microscope slide and so forth. And it's one of the reasons that we use the divoted microscope slides, because we know what volume of water is there on the slide that we are surveying when we're taking our photos, so that we can kind of back calculate volumes and so forth. With that being said, because a lot of this is based off of either literature values or laboratory data from our side, if you guys end up seeing that, oh, well, this really doesn't align with what I'm seeing in my lake, or this is not something that we're getting from laboratory data that we're doing, we can actually customize those values on the fly. It's really easy to change the algorithms. So the more data we get from a cell count side of things, and from photos and things like that, the better those approximations are going to get, and they all update live. So any samples you have previously uploaded will actually get updated once we update those algorithms. So Michael, does that answer your question, or did I ramble on as I tend to?
No, I think so. So it's kind of assuming it's a whole water sample.
Yeah.
A lot of times people are just grabbing, they'll see an accumulation where it blows into a cove, which really isn't a whole water sample, but.
Yeah, so that's why we like to use the bloom extent figure of 1 to 5, right? Because then when you're communicating a sample or a report to, like, let's say your local health department, you can say, hey, I saw like one little formation in the cove at this location. Here's the analysis here. The other nice thing is that because for the price of the subscription that we charge, you get unlimited sample processing and testing. You can actually sample all up and down a whole beach and upload everything all at once, and that way you get an average out of your whole report, and it doesn't cost you anything extra, right? So it doesn't really, prevent you from doing more work, basically, to get more accurate results.
Okay, thanks.
So Igor, a question from Daniel Barada is, when the AI does encounter a species it hasn't been trained on, does it guess, or does it make an attempt to actually ID it?
Yeah, so that's a good question. When it is something that looks suspiciously like a cyanobacteria, it'll guess. But in most cases, the confidence is so low that won't be incorporated into the calculation. The AI only tries to identify, or only includes things into the calculation that are 70%, above 70% in its confidence of ID assignment. So it really depends. If something looks, suspiciously like a Dolichospermum, let's say, it might identify it as a Dolichospermum, but that's why we provide pictures on the back end so that the ultimate decision to take action is never on the AI. It's always on the human operator and the person using it to kind of have the final say.
Awesome. And just to ask a question about the app, can you actually add, Emily Varga asked, can you add sampling points once it's been submitted? So like if you have nutrient data a week later, can you go in and add it?
Yes, absolutely. I forgot to show that, but there is an edit button in the upper right-hand side of the sample screen once you open up the sample to view more details. And then you can go back and add detailed fields, and it just hit update, and then it updates that sample entry for you. Yeah, so absolutely. So if you're sending samples for toxin analysis or nutrient lab data, things like that, you can then go back and add that stuff when it's available.
Awesome. Okay, I'm just going to go back up to the top because we do have some questions that came in earlier. I've got one from Claire Holton. I don't know, Claire, if you wanted to ask Igor directly, or do you want me to, if you feel like asking him? I will read it then. Claire said she might have missed a bit of the beginning, but what were you using to assess whether the taxonomists were correct? What was considered as the ultimate source of cell colony identity? Also, it's a mouthful here, so we can break it up. Also, how does the system handle, or did it test samples where the colonies have degraded into single cells or small colonies or trichomes of only a few cells, and the magnification doesn't seem sufficient to distinguish them from some green algae taxa?
Right. So first things first, the question of single cells and trichomes. We did not build it to be to work on single cellular colonies or very small colonies on purpose. And that is because at that level of detail and that level of, let's say, critique between, or trying to identify between green algae or cyanobacteria or something else that's a tiny little green dot on an image, AI doesn't work too well. So it's really highly reliant on colony morphology, right? So in order to get things that, to get cyanobacterial readouts on less dense concentrations of cyanobacteria, you would really need to do like a filtration or something like that to get a readout. So we did not train it on purpose on single trichomes and single cyanobacterial cells because the error rate is quite high at that point for AI. At that point, you really need somebody well-trained in cyanobacterial taxa to kind of discern those little tiny differences. And you're right, the magnification is not high enough for that for these microscopes for that type of work. And that was also done consciously. So ioLight also makes a higher magnification 1 millimeter microscope, which kind of works with the AI, but the AI is not really, it's meant for the 2 millimeter microscope use. And that is because the 2 millimeter is enough magnification to tell you whether or not you have a cyanobacterial colony, but not so much magnification where you're missing the forest for the trees, where you're focusing in on tiny little segments of a slide and having that represent the entire slide, right? So it's kind of a, we like to think that it's a really good representation of what's in your water sample at this magnification without going into way too much detail. With that being said, if you guys have need for a higher resolution and magnification solution, we can also work with you on that, because right now we have the baseline set for the 2 millimeter microscope, and we can kind of alter it to work with higher resolution, magnification images as well. And then Andrea, there was a bunch of other parts of that question. Do you want to go hit me with one of those too?
For sure, yeah. So the magnification, how does the system handle, or did it test samples where colonies have degraded into single cells or very small colonies? I think you answered that one.
Yep, I think I remember the other part of the question was, what was the ultimate authority on the taxonomy? So the taxonomy was basically, so the way that we worked out the images was we looked through the images ourselves and identified what the cyanobacteria in those images were, and we assigned labels to each cyanobacterial colony in each image. And so then we ran those same images through the AI and did an automated comparison between the two sets of labels. So anywhere where the labels didn't line up right, or the wrong cyanobacterial ID was assigned by either one of those people, was flagged for manual review. And so every single manual review that was flagged, we went back and checked ourselves to see who was right, the AI or the taxonomy. And yeah, like I said, what we found a lot was, it was just, in a lot of cases where the taxonomist made a mistake, it was actually just, you press the wrong button when you're assigning the label, because that's how you assign the label with the software. Or you go back and you accidentally pressed skip a little too soon, or it was Friday night and you really didn't want to label any more images, so you closed out of the window without properly shutting the software program down, right? And these are things that happen in the course of a human reviewing images, but the AI really doesn't make those mistakes, because it analyzes things without prejudice. It just kind of just rattles things off and finishes stuff up. So
great. Okay, next question from Micah Bennett. Based on the experience of other practitioners, existing AI-based identification tools seem to have high error when applied to images from new locations on which the AI has not been trained. Does your system overcome these common complaints, and how?
Yeah, so one of the things that we tried to do right off the bat was not train the AI based on lab images or like any one lake in particular. And that is basically to try to overcome this type of error. And so our library of images is made up of about 30, it's way more than that now, probably about 50 or so different lakes. And like I said, over like 200 and something different instances of harmful algal blooms. So what we really tried to do is basically make it as resistant as possible to this type of error, so that you can just plug and play it into another lake. With that being said, because we're identifying only at a genus level, the morphology is also kind of in our favor, because the morphology of an entire genus varies less so than if you're trying to go down to a species level, right? But if anybody does notice mistakes or anything like that with the AI, the beauty of this platform is that you can let us know. You can even send us a sample, which is even better, and then we can image the heck out of that sample and update the AI on the fly without you having to do much, right? A lot of different AI systems, they'll say, oh, well, you can use it, but you also have to establish the library for yourself, which is not something that we want you to have to do. It seems kind of silly for you to purchase something and then we expect you to make it work for yourself. But so if anything like that works, or if anything like that happens, we'll work with you to kind of update and add new genera and features into the system.
So the app doesn't, this was another question, I'm just going to modify it. The app doesn't actually allow for the user to give it feedback. If there's a mistake suspected, they would contact BloomOptix for
Correct. Yeah. So that will be something that we will enact in the future, but we only launched this thing like a month and a half ago. So that is a feature coming down the road. But for now, it's just a good old fashioned email to Igor with hopefully some screenshots. And then we can kind of work together to fix things and just, improve your experiences.
Okay, I'll take some water because we have more questions. So it's when you were talking about capturing 5 photos, Clara, seems like capturing only 5 would not assess much of the sample. Any idea what volume that would represent? I guess we were talking about sample volume.
Yeah, so 5 is just the recommendation per slide. So typically during our pilot study, we had users collect samples in these 120 or so milliliter sample containers. And then they take 2 drops and put it on a slide, take 5 photos from, the 4 corners and 1 in the middle to reduce bias, and then prepare a second slide and do the same process. That typically, we would then assume that those 5 photos represent a fairly large coverage of the well within the microscope slide, which couple dozen or so microliters, let's call it. So from there, you can upload as many images as you want per slide to the BloomOptix platform, and it all gets analyzed the same way, and it all gets averaged out to a calculation on the back end. So if you want to be much more thorough, if you're like, well, we don't really think that the standard protocol encapsulates what we're seeing under the microscope, you don't have to stop at 5 images. You can take 10 or 20 per slide and then do 2 or 3 slides per sample. It really doesn't matter. The AI is not going to tell you stop uploading stuff because you're uploading, 20 or 30 images. It's just that, for our use case in the last pilot study that we did, that is what, we figured out works the best for our volunteers. And quite honestly, when you're using volunteers, you can't ask them to submit 100 photos or 200 photos, right? As much as we would like to. But yeah, we tried to make it really easy to use for citizen science. And so we said, 2 slide preparations of 5 photos each. And yeah, we seem to have pretty good representation there and results there.
Great. Alrighty. This comes from Mary Neely. She asked, is there a number of training data sets required or perhaps geographic area? Any way to prioritize which species to add if you get a bunch of requests?
Yeah, so that's a good question. There is no number of really training data sets, or we don't have to say, oh, we need the 4 corners of the US all to participate or else it doesn't work. The important thing is to have a really diverse image library. In some cases for us, for example, for a Famozamenon, only a few of our lakes that participated had Famozamenon colonies, but the difference in those Famozamenon colonies was large enough that we could get away with sampling 5 different lakes and cover the entire genus for fairly good accuracy in detection for a Famozamenon. So as long as the underlying photo library is diverse enough to kind of cover that whole genus, it'll start working. And then, of course, we can kind of put something out there that, with a new application, for example, for Planktothrix, that works less well than the 6 that we've already established, with the understanding that as people use it, it's going to get better and better and better and better as our photo quality, our image library increases. So the only requirements to add a new species, or I'm sorry, a new genera in this case, to the list is we just need enough water samples and enough photos collected of that genera to start training the AI on it. And then once we have enough photos, it typically takes a couple of months for us to get through the process and add it into the network.
Okay. One more from Miri is, as far as picoplankers go that are less than 3 microns, is it only as good as the original scope as far as, I'm assuming, identifying? How good is it with picoplanters?
I don't know. We haven't used that too much. With that being said, there is a lake here in Syracuse that is famous for the picoplankton or picoplankton that it has in it that I could look into. It might be a really good excuse to go to a really pretty part of the city. So yeah, but like I said, the resolution of the ioLights is about 1 micron. So something about 3 microns in size might be a little bit difficult or not in the resolution that you want it. Yeah, I'm not sure how well it would work on that, Mary. You can, if you reach out to me, we can chat about it a little bit more, and maybe we can do some testing on the on everything. So.
Okay, and I've got, we're at the 1 hour, but I just want to squeeze in 2 more questions from Hal McLean. So if anybody has to go, I just want to thank you for your time. But I'm just going to get these in from Hal here. So to elaborate, cell counts seem very biased since it's a biased collection and biased slide setup and photos. That would make cell counts very highly varied. Do you have any tips on trying to standardize this?
Yes. So Hal, awesome question. This is something, again, this is something we try to address with our 5 points of photo taking in each in each sample. And, when I was talking to Michael about, having a standardized sampling plan or, sampling up and down a beach for a certain period of time. The one thing that we really strived for when we developed this thing is to give people kind of universal access and unlimited sample processing and unlimited image upload and so forth, to enable people to basically kind of cater their needs to, or their sampling efforts to their needs. So the best way to make this not biased, or just like any scientific thing, is repeat sampling of same locations, or repeat monitoring of certain locations and so forth. And so my advice would be, have a network set up where you say, hey, we're going to monitor this beach. We're going to collect 3 samples up and down the length of it at these prescribed locations. And we're going to collect each sample in a bottle about this big. And out of each bottle, we're going to do 2 or 3 pulls. And we're going to do 3 to 4 slides per sample and upload all of those separately onto BloomOptix, and then figure out what the cell counts or findings are from those standardized samples. And in that way, you're not just sampling only harmful algal blooms or only things like this or that, right? You're now using the BloomOptix AI and the ioLights to basically be a monitoring tool that is much less biased than spot sampling or reacting and so forth. And then for your question on incorporating weather patterns and predictions into the thing. So like I said, the really nice thing about these ioLight microscopes, the thing that really kind of sparked our interest into them is the fact that they link into your cell phone. And so when you provide BloomOptix data, and when you provide samples to upload into the AI, what we're working on next is basically incorporating an automated weather pattern tracking protocol. So every time you upload images, we download your local weather patterns and your location and all that kind of fun stuff, and tag it onto the samples you upload. And so I don't think it's ever going to be at a spot where we call it true prediction, but we think we can get a pretty good early alert system where it says, hey, every time you exceed weather, ambient temperature of 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and you have a calm, windless set of 5 days following a rain event in your area, every time you meet this pattern, we see that you start testing more and more for harmful algal blooms at these locations. And so we can send you out an alert that says, hey, we've recognized this pattern before, and that it results in microcystis blooms at these locations. Be on the lookout, be prepared for more testing. So I don't think we would ever end up in a place where we would tell you, hey, we predict an algal bloom here, with weatherman accuracy, right? But what we can do is we can pinpoint patterns for you. And this is something, again, not available right now, but something we'll work on later on. We can pinpoint these patterns for you to say, every time you guys see these weather events, or every time your nutrient concentrations follow this trend, we see that you peak in algal bloom testing at these locations. So, here's a preemptive warning for you to be ready to test or prepare for increased reports of HABs there. So, yeah.
Good stuff. Awesome. Well, thanks, Igor. I'm going to stop the recording. I don't know if, Igor, you want to take more questions after this, but I think we're going to send out an email from BloomOptix and Aquatic Sensors with the recording and more information on everything that you've heard today. So thank you, everybody, for joining. It's been a super engaging, informative webinar. And Igor, thank you so much, and BloomOptix for presenting this today.
Yeah, of course. If you guys have any questions or anything like that, reach out to me at info@bloomoptix.com. That's our email, or visit our website, bloomoptix.com, and you can find out more about things like pricing and things like that. We are running a promotion right now. If you use the promo code webinar, you can get $150 off of the starter kit that we sell on our site, which gives you basically everything you need to get going in a year-long subscription to the BloomOptix AI. But more of that will be shared in the follow-up email here. So, but thank you guys all for awesome questions. yeah, come into the webinar.
Great. Have a great day, everybody.
Thanks, Igor. Thanks, Andrew.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.